talk about building the business case for RPO. How do you approach your CXO to C-level and create a winning leadership buy-in with your RPO program? Today we have a couple of expert panelists with us today. We're going to have a great conversation. The reason we're doing this as it relates to RPO is that today there are really two driving forces that impact the way companies approach the talent marketplace. And there's a huge need for highly skilled employees in a very competitive marketplace, for one. And there's also, as many of you know in your positions, there's a continual drive to reduce talent acquisition costs while being forced to become more efficient at the same time. So you're trying to find the right talent, highly skilled talent, and become better and more efficient at it and reduce costs. That's all of those things, which sounds really easy, right? So to this end, you're probably faced, and as many of us are, with mounting pressure to do more with less and reduce that talent acquisition budget while gaining those competitive advantages. So today we'll take a look at how we can meet those challenges, how we can build a business case with our CXO, our C-suite leadership, to get an RPO program and get the buy-in that you need at that leadership level. I think you probably, if you've done any research on RPO, one of the key things is to get that leadership buy-in. That's what we're talking about today. So we're going to take a quick look behind the scenes. We have a talent acquisition professional with us who's doing this today at his company. And we also have the leader of Yo's RPO practice, who is doing this for many customers across many different industries. So we're going to talk about today, I'll show you the agenda. We have our panelists. We're going to introduce them, go through some of the key takeaways we want you to be listening for today, and then go through some of the drivers and the challenges, how to set up, kind of look at your needs, and then build that business case and connect it to your business objectives. So, and then most importantly, probably at the end, is getting that connection to those business objectives and the return on that investment. We will have questions, so just a couple housekeeping items. You are muted, so we can't hear you, but you do have a question panel, so feel free to ask any questions in that question panel. And if there are questions that are relevant to a section we're covering and we can answer them during one of those sections, I may stop and ask our panelists that question, or we may just keep them to the end, depending on how long we're going and how things are going and if it's relevant again to that section. So please feel free to ask those questions, and we'll try to get those in. You will be getting these slides via email, and then we'd be happy to follow up if you do have any other questions, okay? So that's about it for me, at least for my introduction. I will introduce myself as the moderator. My name is Matt Rivera. I'm the VP of Marketing and Communications for Yo. And we're a talent acquisition solution provider, a lot of experience in recruitment process outsourcing and other talent acquisition solutions such as contingent staffing and management of contingent staffing. So that's me. What I'd like to do now is introduce you to our two panelists. We're very lucky today to have Patrick Reese from Sabic. He's a recruitment staffing manager for Sabic in the Americas. They're a global manufacturer of many different things and operate in 40 countries around the world. Innovative material solutions that change the world for good. So we're very, very fortunate to have Patrick with us. It's his experience, and throughout his career, held many different talent acquisition leadership positions in many different industries. So, Patrick, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you for having me join you today.
Great. And also, we have with us Andy Rohn, who is Yo's VP of RPO. And Andy's got more than 15 years of experience in the industry, Vice President of Operations for RPO providers in the past, and led many RPO engagements with Fortune 500 companies, and he is Yo's leader of RPO and is today providing that leadership for all of our RPO customers throughout all of our industries at Yo. So Andy, great for you to join us today. How you doing?
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon.
Okay, so let's get started, and I think the first thing we want to do here is give you the key takeaways. What we like to do is start with the end in mind, which is what we'd like you to listen for and take away from today's broadcast. So there are 4 key things that we think you can take away from this and get some more information to help you build your business case and talk to your C-level executives. So 1, we're going to talk about the key issues and drivers that are creating this critical need for better processes in talent acquisition. We're going to talk about number 2, why a needs assessment is critical. It's critical, and it's a great first step and starting point for building this business case. You need to take a look at that. Number 3 is developing this business case and overcoming, and we'll talk a little bit about those stumbling blocks to getting that executive buy-in, which is so critical. And then number 4, obviously, we're all being asked to do more with less and make it cost-effective, so there needs to be some return on investment for an RPO program, and it needs to be aligned with the company's objectives, and that helps you with how you're going to sell it to the C-suite. So that's what we're going to cover today. So look for those 4 things. We will definitely cover them and give you some information. Our time, is brief. It goes by very fast. So we will, again, have questions at the end, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to try to answer those for you. Okay, great. So let's start with, before we dive in, actually, let's start with a polling question. So we're going to put up a polling question on the screen right now, and I've got just a quick question for you. Let's take a look at it. All right, the poll is open. And the poll is basically asking, what do you believe is going to be a major obstacle to an RPO program? And this can be either if you have an RPO program or you have implemented an RPO program, what did you find was a major stumbling block or obstacle you encountered? Or if you're anticipating implementing an RPO program, what's the stumbling block that you think might exist in your company, your organization, that you might face in the areas that are listed here. So just take a moment. We're going to close the poll in just about 15 seconds. We'll leave it up. So please get anybody else would like to answer. Go ahead and answer, and we close the poll. So let's take a look at the polling results. So let's see. And it's not on my screen showing me the polling results.
We've got it here, Matt.
All right, so why don't you guys give me an idea?
It's still up there.
Of what
so in order, we've got budgetary at 11%, company culture at 11%, existing RPO provider at 11%, and really the main one is understanding the benefits of RPO at 67%.
Excellent. All right. That's great insight, and it shows that you guys are already going to be listening for the right thing, because I think that overall what we're talking about here is how to communicate the benefits of this program, whether they be in the budgetary, the culture, or any of those areas, how we're going to get that. All right? So now we will, in fact, dive in to the meat of what we're talking about. So we're looking at gaining this leadership buy-in for an RPO solution, and that statement kind of assumes that an RPO program addresses the market force issues that we talked about earlier, that need for highly skilled employees and then the need to drive down those costs for talent acquisition. So Andy, let me ask you, let's start with what's driving these needs today. What do you see as the drivers for the needs for an outsourced recruiting solution?
Sure. Well, so I think what most of us would agree to is that over the last decade, companies have been forced to do more with less in all aspects of their business. So efficiency and productivity rule the day, and obviously that doesn't exclude talent acquisition. In addition, the complexities of finding the right talent have increased. Technology has drastically changed the way recruiters and candidates communicate, and this technology has given an edge to those companies who've figured out how to effectively deploy it and implement it. So we also have the dynamic nature of talent acquisition within most companies, which makes it difficult to accommodate the ever-changing needs. So this could be seasonal, this could be month to month. This could be new business types of initiatives. These fluctuations in rec load or requisition load require the talent acquisition team that's able to scale up quickly. And most companies don't want the burden of a long-term fixed infrastructure cost. And so when you think about scaling up and scaling down, most companies are faced with reducing a talent acquisition team. That type of thing causes either pain or cost. So to this end, RPO has been able to address these issues, particularly around scalability and cost savings. Now, also beyond that, RPO has evolved over the last decade. And, a short time ago, it was strictly about cost. Now it's all about the greater impact that talent acquisition is having on the business, where we see alignment between workforce planning and overall business strategy.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that kind of sets a great stage for kind of what's happening overall in a lot of different organizations. So Patrick, let's talk about at SABIC and you as a buyer of RPO services. What have you seen over the past decade?
Sure. I would also tend to agree with Andy that over the past 10 or 15 years, when you think about the talent acquisition function of HR, it's gone through radical changes. I use the word radical pretty loosely just because of the common business mistakes organizations have made when it comes to looking at investing and building capabilities around the talent acquisition function of HR. So if you look at the past, it was very common in the business world to reduce talent-related infrastructure within HR during recessionary periods of economic growth, and certainly went through two of those cycles over the past decade and a half. And so as a result of those decisions, which were very short-term focused, what was put on the back burner was HR effectiveness over the long term with regarding workforce planning, and that really put organizations behind the eight ball to comprehend with the reality facing, what are some of those demographic or talent-related challenges that are facing, corporations today. So cutting costs in this area of HR to solve some short-term fiscal challenges might have been a wise tactic to use over a very short period of time. But organizations that actually went through that and scaled back organization operations with recruiting during these times actually wound up being even further set back. And so what was lost was knowledge, sound, robust processes that were in place at the time, but then also a lost opportunity to adopt advanced technology to really bring them to a more advanced stages of acquiring talent. So today, if you fast forward to 10 or 15 years later to 2015, now we're seeing organizations really planning for the future, and talent acquisition is at the forefront of the HR discussions and strategic planning effort. And so now, as a result of that, a lot of organizations, similar to what SABIC has been encountering over the past few years, is really understanding ways to develop agility and competencies around recruitment. And so to meet our short and long-term objectives as an organization, what we've been doing at SABIC is assessing our talent capabilities, both acquiring new hires and then, of course, developing and retaining our existing talent to make sure that they represent the very foundation of our entire corporate strategic growth plan that is being set up for the next decade.
Got it. So, wow. So I think that really kind of sets off, what we're gonna talk about and the needs for having these changes and improvements. So it sounds like, Andy, what you were saying, and Patrick, what you have seen is that, over this time period, that talent leaders are certainly seeing this need for change and improvements, and to kind of move things forward into, whether it's with technology or whatever it may be. But it sounds like the challenge may be in helping the leaders, the organizational leaders, see this need. So, Andy, I guess we'll start with you. But does the CXO really understand some of the challenges faced by talent acquisition today?
Well, Matt, I think that's really the big question. And the quick answer is that many times they don't see it, or they don't understand the risks, or and this is what's probably most important, is that they don't tie talent acquisition challenges, or on the other side of that coin is talent acquisition success, to the success of the business. And if we're talking about risks, we have to look at both sides of risk as well. If they don't change, what is at risk?
If they do change, how do they do that effectively?
Yeah. So, Patrick, from your perspective and Exobic, what did you see, and how did that, some of these challenges and some of these things that may or may not have had visibility with this level, how did that impact your ability to get things done?
Sure. So I would say yes, we absolutely did see that. I think our executives within SABIC, across all of our global regions, and much to their credit, I will add, wholeheartedly see the need to change the perspective on talent acquisition. And so in my position, it forced me as one of the regional talent acquisition leaders to become this internal champion of developing a very robust recruitment function within my region. And then on a global platform, I had to be, in more of like an activist role. And what I mean by that is really being able to share some of the information and best practices, not only with global counterparts, but also with some of my key stakeholders that are part of the organization that I support. So this would be inclusive of our HR function, in an expanded capacity, then also our strategic business unit leaders. But we also had to take it a little bit further than that. We really had to develop a very strong discipline around establishing business crucial partnerships internally, and really treat them as key stakeholders, not only within HR, but also within the business units that were going to be aligning themselves for our next growth over the upcoming decade. And so what we found as a result of doing that internal due diligence is that we need to develop a very strong sense of urgency around building our partnership with our RPO provider, which has been Yo, to meet these objectives. And we could no longer attempt to begin this journey just simply looking at cost-cutting our way through problems. Okay. We also had to do more with less. Again, we were emerging from a recessionary period where budgets were reduced at the time, and certainly understand where we did develop existing capabilities and then expand upon them, and then really commit to raising that bar accordingly with a full spirit of transparency to our key stakeholders. So we had to go out and educate the business unit leaders on what exactly we were committing to, and also take a look at our existing model with our partnership with Yo and the key stakeholders from that side to really identify and define what would be classified as sustainable long-term solution to our growth ambitions when it comes to acquiring talent.
Excellent. So you said a couple things there. One was creating that sense of urgency, which led to you educating, or the need to educate. So Andy, let's start there, Andy. So tell us how you communicate with that upper organizational level, CXC level, to ensure that they understand the obstacles and variables, and you talked about risk a little earlier. And how do we start to communicate that and help them adopt this change and get ready to adopt this change to achieve these results?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. And the first step really involves understanding the talent acquisition landscape, and as mentioned earlier, how the talent acquisition landscape ties to the business success. And I think Patrick was right on point when he talked about sharing best practices and education of business leaders. There's a public relations, a PR element to this whole thing, which is really critical for those talent acquisition leaders like Patrick. I think, but if we look at the landscape and what needs to be evaluated, we need to be able to answer as many questions as possible. Who's involved? Who are those stakeholders? Where are the opportunities for talent acquisition and improvement? And how does that impact the overall business? And what happens here many times is those connection points just aren't made. The connection point isn't made by the talent acquisition leaders. The connection points aren't made by the business owners, and then sometimes at that CXO level as well. But then again, so back to the landscape, when we think about the actual hiring managers, where do they see the trouble with talent acquisition? And then as the leader of talent acquisition, how do we then go address those issues? Another question you can ask yourself is, do our systems support us properly, such as our applicant tracking system or the candidate relationship management tools? What does our data tell us about our opportunities, and how do our metrics compare to industry benchmarks? Certainly spending
our money, our out-of-pocket costs for talent acquisition needs, from agency use to internet advertising. All of these variables impact the business and the success of the business. And the CXO will understand when we can tie these things directly to talent acquisition success.
Mm. And I think this is kind of a big question for Patrick, certainly. So based on your experience, what things what variables and things were you evaluating to help with you kind of on this journey that you were taking to kind of make this case?
Yeah, great point, Matt. I would say that what we had to do is really adopt the mindset of a professional architect team. So essentially we went on a listening tour and had to ask a lot of questions, to business leaders and key stakeholders within HR, where in many cases you're asking the exact same questions, and purposely so, just to see how much variation existing at the time. And I will say at that time when we were doing that due diligence, the differences were very wide in terms of the gaps that we were able to identify. So, for us, our marching orders was that we had to really develop a full comprehension of who and what represented what a key stakeholder was, what were those pain points, and what was defined as critical measures of success. So we also had to do a very deep dive on our own with our, looking at our existing data outputs and what was some of the information that was being generated, and was it worthy of influencing business decisions, or are these simply responses to anecdotal or more subjective type of comments that we would cross off the checklist. We also had to go back to the basics of understanding both the art and the science of recruiting. And so the art side of the equation really resulted in a true and an honest and objective assessment of a reputation as an employer. We had to hear about what job seekers, what new hires and former employees were saying about us, as well as our existing employees. What was our story? What does the public say about us in the U.S. versus what the public says about us in the Middle East or China or over in Europe? What about our current and former prospective employees? Would they come back? Would they have a positive thing or a message to say about SABIC as an employer? The science piece of it was really making sure we had the right data to help guide future decision making and really develop more of a robust output that would capture the attention of our key stakeholders, so they would also get educated along the journey. And so the corresponding analysis that took place really helped identify some awesome opportunities for us as an organization, make some improvements that we could enjoy tackling as low-hanging fruit in the interim and on a short-term basis, but then also position us to get into a much longer-term operating rhythm, a more sustainable operating rhythm, with utilizing that data to demonstrate progress to the business. And so that really helped us as a function, not only within HR, but just as a business function within SABIC, develop a lot more transparency around our abilities to talent region.
Yeah, I like the analogy for kind of the art and science of it, because it sounds like, if it was pretty straightforward and just the science, it would be a lot easier, but there's an art into it. And one of the main points, one of the things that you mentioned in there was working with stakeholders, and specifically, I would think some of the hiring managers to get their input and buy-in. Andy, I was wondering from your perspective, why is this important, and what's important about getting that buy-in?
Yeah, I think that Patrick provided a lot of good insight into this and how his team actually approached this. The alignment with the business leaders, with the stakeholders, with hiring managers is critical, because ultimately, when you're building that business case, and the decision-making entity, and let's call that person the CXO, that person has to understand business impact. And so again, I've said a couple different things that are talking about drawing the line, alignment between talent acquisition success and business success. When it comes down to alignment with business leaders, these business leaders understand those things. They understand the impact of not having somebody on board when they need to have somebody on board. They understand the impact of quality of candidates and how that can impact productivity. And so having those discussions, forcing those discussions from a talent acquisition leader standpoint is really important. And this then becomes the backbone of the business case, because again, I think what's important to understand is that the CXO is going to look to the business and the impact of that business but the talent acquisition impact on that business. So it's not simply a nice to have, but really a requirement. And alignment with the business leaders and solving their problems is what makes this overall the decision a business requirement.
Mm-hmm. And obviously a big decision, and something that needs to be continually supported throughout. Patrick, how did you make this happen? How did you make it happen at SABIC for kind of getting some of the things Andy was talking about?
Sure. No, Andy definitely hit on some really big touch points about treating stakeholders as shareholders. Even though we're not a publicly held company, we very much adopted that type of a Wall Street mindset where the shareholders are the customers, and without a supporting cast of customers to help influence some of your decisions that you're going to be making, it's going to be a tough position for you to advocate what the strategic plan is going to be, and you're really going to have a difficult time if you don't conduct your due diligence and again really appreciate and gain that deep understanding of what is on the shareholder's mind. So in order to get to that next step, if you're looking to raise the bar or to partner with an organization like a YO as an RPO service provider to help build that agility for you, you've got to drive those conversations as talent acquisition leaders. The business leaders aren't going to come to you. They might. Some organizations have different leadership styles, and certainly aware of that. Ditto for SABIC. But really, the key learning from my own experience, I haven't gone through this as a regional leader at SABIC, is to gain the confidence of these key shareholders to be sound communicators. You have to have an open mind, and you have to have a very high tolerance for ambiguity. We live in such a volatile world that is always changing in the business landscape, and so talent acquisition leaders that accept and respect this immediately will have a very high chance of success. And so just to build upon what we did at SABIC a little bit further to provide you some more detail, this was a journey. We certainly went through our fair share of organizational changes just based on feedback that our own customers were providing us in terms of how we conduct our business operations. And so that type of feedback was highly influential in terms of what type of talent do we have that exists today, and where do we need to go out and buy or acquire talent to get us to that next level so we can continue to evolve with our customers. So our main objective throughout all of this was aligning our strategic plan as a talent acquisition function right in lockstep with the overall objectives of SABIC's corporate growth plan for the next decade. And taking those initial steps on that listening tour that I mentioned before, we came out of that, we emerged from that experience with a really big opportunity that we've actually seized and have continued to build trust by building some of those short-term successes and then also increasing our ability to deliver how we measure results and then how we maintain opportunities for shareholders to provide us with that objective feedback, and then certainly innovating our way to solve some of the challenges that are facing us, using different technologies, adopting a digital media strategy so we can market SABIC as a top employer. When we look back at where we were in 2005, we just didn't have this type of competency or set of competencies within the function. We were so dependent on third-party partners and also very top-heavy with our investments with job boards at the time, because that was really where the market was heading. We didn't really develop the ability to innovate and really think about these ideas on our own. And it was also very new for our executives that we're actually moving into a different environment at SABIC acquired in the form of GE Plastics, which is a big component of what I support in the Americas region. And so we didn't have the types of sourcing capabilities that we have today. We didn't have the metrics or service level agreements with NBO that we have today back in 2005. So it's looking at advanced technologies that will help position us to attract great talent. It's really, again, going back to that analogy I provided earlier, it's thinking out of it as a designer, as an architect, and what is your framework going to look like as a function? And then from a systemic point of view, technology point of view, your brand, the engagement of your leadership, and also types of people that, whether it's internal or whether it's RPO provided, operational type of capability that you need to introduce, that's going to be very important. So we have taken those lessons that we've learned along our journey and certainly respect the fact that both the market landscape and the way talent finds positions and certainly networks is continuously evolving. And so We strictly partner with organizations, like EO, like other providers that we work with, that are thinking ahead of the curve like we are, and that are sitting at the table with us, strategizing, contemplating what are some of the future trends, directionally where are they going, and how can that influence us to invest in more long-term momentum, building solutions that will sustain these types of efforts we're building today in 2025.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I think that what you really hit on a lot, at least for me, is that it's constantly thinking about how you're kind of innovating in this area and how it needs to move forward. And we see a lot of companies certainly who are still stuck in talent acquisition processes that have not evolved over time, and with technology and the pace of and the complexity of the workforce today, we've certainly seen that. So I think that's great. So we've talked a little bit about kind of getting that open mind and the acceptance. And so let's go down. Oh, we have a quick poll here. So actually we won't open the poll, but here's, you can vote for your favorite dog, 1, 2, or 3. We just want to make sure you're still awake and with us. And you can vote for your favorite dog there. I like number 1. I don't know if I hope he's playing dead. Let me just leave it at that. All right, so we talked about that kind of getting that open mind and acceptance here. I think it's really good with that alignment with the business leaders. So, based on the interaction with these business leaders now, and if you've kind of set this stage for it, let's talk about the business case and the areas that need to be addressed. So, Andy, let's start with kind of what are the priorities here when you're looking at building the business case and your analysis, and, getting ready to put that business case together?
Well, so I think, Matt, one of the important things is, and again, I'm going to kind of take some key things that Patrick just mentioned. He talked about innovation and being ahead of the curve. He talked about a little bit in the past about using third parties and job boards. What's important about what he said is, there's a lot of different ways in which to get the job done. And so when you're looking at the business case, the most important thing to consider is obviously cost. The data to understand, what it will cost to actually transition from the current state to the next level. Now, so let me give you an example that Patrick actually brought up in talking about using third parties or agencies. Many talent leaders get stuck with this traditional form of recruitment scalability. So when they need additional recruitment support, they go to a fee-based agency, which, this can ultimately result in huge costs, 25 to 30% of first-year compensation. What's important about understanding that approach is that there's really no guarantee, and I'm not talking about the guarantee with a placement, but I'm actually talking about, is that a solution that you're confident is actually going to be able to work, and is it going to be able to be a long-term solution? And really, this is a tactic and not a strategy. It's a band-aid of sorts. And so if this choice is actually made often, it's typically because there's a fundamental flaw in the talent acquisition infrastructure. Now, if you look beyond costs, and beyond out-of-pocket costs, what one would typically hear from hiring managers are issues around candidate flow and candidate quality. Now, obviously, these two issues are intertwined, but the question is, how are we measuring these two metrics now? And then what are the options for improving them at an efficient cost level? And RPO is going to understand how to attack those two issues, even if a company right now doesn't have the metrics for quality and flow. An RPO can actually provide the infrastructure to begin the measurement and then drive continuous improvement of those two metric points. And then what we want to do, again, and hopefully everybody's hearing the theme here, is that these metrics can be tied to overall business performance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think let's, ask, Patrick on this one. When you were building the business case for SABIC, walk us through what you did to review some of these metrics, and then did you present them as part of your business case, or how would you present them, or how did you approach that?
Absolutely. So that, again, going back to the journey discussion. So when I first joined Savic in late 2007, I was completely surprised about how dependent they were on external contingent staffing providers. So initially, I did just a very simple cost analysis on what we were spending. And to add insult to injury, there really wasn't any kind of governance or process in terms of how they were being utilized. It was basically a select list of, and a high list, I will add, of contingent staffing providers that were basically the recruiting arm of Savic in our region. And I couldn't believe how little control we had over our talent acquisition capabilities. So what we did, to kind of fast forward, is we looked at, okay, there's certainly cost savings opportunities by engaging Yo and investing in an RPO and expanding upon an RPO solution. And really what we had to do was really add a very important element. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in today's webinar, which is having a very sound group of metrics. And so we kind of did this in 3 dimensions. One, we needed to have an operational view of what we were doing. And so we designed and developed together and what we call our Rpo Dashboard, okay? And this basically took a look at how fast are we filling our positions across our business units, what did our internal staffing movement look like, because we do have a lot of promotions and transfers within Savic. We also had to contend with the fact that during a few periods of time over the past 10 years, we had shrinking budgets. And so while we were certainly looking at saving and retaining costs, we also had to become more innovative to make sure that we sustain our ability to attract passive and active job seekers, not only to our career site, but to Savic as a whole. And so in addition to that, we partnered directly with Andy's team within Yo to really establish a really strong sense of formality with a partnership. So the business fully understood that this was a mutual arrangement between 2 organizations that looked at this strictly as a partnership. And so we had a service level agreement with the specific criteria established with those SLAs, along with key performance indicators to give us a good view of how we were performing and what kind of progress was being made, what were some of those challenge spots that we needed to address and further mitigate if necessary. And then also another key element that we brought into the equation was, well, what was our internal customer saying about us? What were our new hires saying about our recruiters that were being provided by Yo and the staffing specialists that were provided by Yo? What about our HR business partners that were mission critical to the staffing process? And then more importantly, what about the hiring managers, the ones that were the budget owners of these new hires and recruiting activities? What were they saying about the effectiveness of recruiting? We still measure that today as part of a global quality of hire metric. And so we've been taking a very long journey, going from tactical to strategic, by using these baseline metrics from a few years ago, and now they're part of the deeper analysis that we can look at historical trends and actually start to position ourselves to look more toward the future versus relying strictly on historical or past patterns for us to make our business decisions, and also how we go about developing future strategic plans and objectives with our recruitment efforts.
That's yeah. So I think that you hit on a couple of really important things here. I want to just take a little quick time check on here. So I'm going to ask you. I do have a question here that I want to ask you that came through really quick. So give me a quick answer on this, so we can get to just a couple other things before the time runs out. But I thought this was kind of interesting. So to get really specific for a moment, an area that might be sensitive as you're kind of making all these changes, right? So change can be a little scary for some. So when building this business case and talking to everybody about it, and certainly talking with even maybe internal resources, how should a talent leader, if you give me like a quick answer on, how should a talent leader address their current recruiting team or other support staff or maybe other things that are in place? What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think, Matt, that this is, it's something that every organization is faced with, and they have to look at their current infrastructure and then the really key value that they have to the organization. And so some questions that should help in decision-making regarding this is, of the individuals that they have right now, are these members of your current recruitment staff, do they have endemic knowledge or experience, as well as a level of performance that that truly can't be substituted for and can't be replaced? Are they capable of adapting to some of the change in drive and performance? So Patrick has mentioned a lot of things that Sabic did. That change is pressure on current recruitment team members. And what a company has to ask themselves is that, are those individuals capable of making the leap to a new and more efficient model with new metrics, as Patrick just mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds, and that sounds challenging. How did you handle it, Patrick, at Sabic?
Yeah, sure. I think Andy's absolutely right. I'll just elaborate a little bit further. One of the key takeaways from some of that due diligence we did way back in our listening tour was you're right. There was a lot of elements of change that came out of that journey, and not all of those happened overnight. We had to think about our internal stakeholders, especially within HR, that were like, wow, you guys are so fast with change. Well, welcome to talent acquisition. It's always changing. And one of the key takeaways that we've encountered together as part of this partnership was we created this brand new element, not something that we developed as inventors, but we really created a new element of advisoryship, and really making sure that a trusted advisor was a key element of a recruiter's DNA that was provided by Yo. And so we worked very closely with the key leadership at Yo as well as with their internal staffing team to really understand, okay, since you're giving us so much autonomy as a buyer of your service to really heavily influence the type of people you're going to recruit to the account, that's half the equation. That's a demonstration to us as a buyer that you truly understand what we need to make ourselves more agile and much more valuable to the business. And so that's the kind of recruiter that Yo provides us today versus in the past, which might have been more transactional focused. Today's recruiter is right involved with a hiring manager and the HR business partner, not only driving candidates through the process, but providing a lot of value with making sure the people that we're going to potentially hire within Sabic are strong technical fit, but are key strong fits around our values, which is the inner fabric of our culture within Sabic. So, and that's really one of the key takeaways that immediately comes to my mind when it comes to making ourselves more agile.
All right, so I want to get to just a couple other things before we run out of time here. I think that one of the main things we want to talk about, Andy, is, we talked about the drivers, but I think maybe it's probably good. You guys kind of covered a lot of really good stuff in the business case and building that and getting the buy-in and moving things forward. So how do you connect what you program to your bigger business objectives and things that the organization's trying to get done?
Yeah. So there's usually a few key metrics, Matt, that one typically hears about when talking about connecting an RPO to business objectives and actually making an impact on the success of the overall business. The first thing that always comes up is really around retention. But you also hear things about employee performance levels. And then the last one is really around agility and workforce alignment. So the ability of an organization to actually capitalize on opportunities. So having the right talent to actually execute when business opportunities become available. So, this requires a talent acquisition team moving from a reactive model to a proactive model. A lot of time is spent in organizations talking about pipelining candidates, and there's a lot to be said for that, because overall, most organizations are highly reactive when it comes to their talent acquisition. What happens is, and we all know this, requisitions open and then the recruiting process starts. So what we want to do is we want to avoid being hamstrung by having open positions to actually moving towards having the pipeline of qualified candidates and tangible connections to communities of candidates who, once on board, are going to allow that organization to reach its business goals. Now, what I'm saying is not really a new concept. However, and this is where the RPO comes in,
is operationalizing and making this concept efficient and cost-effective is a new concept, and it is being implemented today.
And that's the kind of the concept you covered there is kind of that delivering that just in time to capitalize on those opportunities and getting that stuff done. So Patrick, when you were looking at it from SABIC's overall business objectives, how are you able to connect them to what you were trying to do?
Well, basically, I was tapped on the shoulder, very early into this, and was told by my senior executives, Patrick, you need to be the regional lead on this. You need to personify this and really, put your own art form on this. And so when I thought about the partner, how I could evolve, we'll continue to advocate for it and be in position to demonstrate some of the great progress we've made over these past 8 years. It came down to my ability and my staff communications working with members of Andy and his team. If that didn't exist, it'd be very much a one-way street where it would be much more anecdotal, and if I didn't provide the level of transparency for my partner in terms of where I'm actually doing very well and I want to continue to build capabilities and what are some new areas based on organizational structural changes within SABIC where I need to actually add more capabilities, I wouldn't be able to be successful as a regional leader in my position. And so I'm being counted on by SABIC, in North and South America to build these types of capabilities, to take our talent acquisition abilities to the next level. So Andy's right about agility. We talked a lot about that today in some of the previous questions that you asked us, and it's true. This is not just a catchphrase or a buzzword that you're going to find out there on the block. This is reality. And so then having both the agility and the scalability, partnering with an external RPO provider gives us those capabilities. And I just would add very quickly is that, while we're continuously evolving within SABIC, it's another really good practice if you're thinking about going in this direction as a talent acquisition leader is to make sure that you celebrate and brag about your successes as a function. Very more often than not, talent acquisition, when being so customer-centric, it can feel like a customer service organization where we tend to look at things in a number of complaints versus number of successes. Do the exact opposite. Look at the successes versus the complaints. It's not that the complaints aren't or should not be addressed, but again, it is such an evolving game. I mean, I've been doing talent acquisition for 20 years, and the common phrase that I continue to use is I'm still a student of the game. It keeps you very modest, but it also keeps you, at the hands of being very innovative. And I think it's always good to stay in tune and network with folks like myself, and also attend various conferences where you can get access to information, because the landscape is hyper-competitive and it's always changing. So maintaining that alignment with your partner and having another pair of eyes or a team to look at some of those challenges that are part of you really makes the job that much more exciting, but also it also takes away some of the pressure, alleviates some of the pressure that's on it.
Yeah, I like the idea of being kind of a student of the game, right? Because it kind of you constantly have to kind of keep up and keep tuned up and keep your team and what you're doing, innovative and moving forward. So that's great stuff. So one last thing I want to cover.
Hey, Matt, let me just jump in right there, because I think what Patrick hit upon is something that I see him doing well, and I think it needs to be echoed, and that is, celebrating his wins and making sure that the overall organization knows about what the talent organization is doing. And as he mentioned many times, that enabling organization within a company can be overlooked. And so those success stories of what's happening and how he's moving the improvement of the overall talent organization is really important for, again, all stakeholders to understand. And he does a great job at that.
Really good point, and obviously that helps as you're continuing to keep that buy-in and keep selling the program as you're going through here. So one last thing I want to cover. We're about 5 or 6 minutes away from the end here, and we'll hopefully take a couple of questions if we can at the end. But if you guys could just, one of the things, and we could probably have a whole webinar on this, or maybe we will in the future. But I think that if we fast forward to an RPO implementation that has gone through and is running and running well, what's the best way or a good way to determine that return on investment and see if this business case that you prepared is kind of held up to the way you thought it was going to work out, and how do you show some of that? If you can kind of give us an idea.
Well, so Matt, I think the first thing is the business case is built, but the business case is a living document that actually has legs throughout a number of different checkpoints within the partnership between the RPO and the organization. And these checkpoints typically occur at formally constructed times, such as quarterly business reviews. And during these meetings, the RPO and the organization's talent leader, like Patrick, work together to review key metrics, service level agreements, and then progress against strategic initiatives. So analysis is done on what's been achieved and trends over the course of the partnership. In this meeting, you can have everybody from the talent leaders, HR leaders, to those key stakeholders, hiring managers, corporate leaders. Now, that can even be driven down even further into some other metrics. But again, the key is taking that business case, formulating metrics to guide you all the way through to ensure that we are on track at 30, 60, 90 days after implementation, and then all the way through the course of the partnership.
Excellent. And Patrick, and how are you showing, or how did you show return on investment? And you talked a lot about continuing to evolve your program. So how are you showing that at SABIC?
Well, I know we're getting short on time here, Matt, so I'll be very brief, but I could say that we can summarize this in really in one word, and that's engagement. And so we really recognized as we went through this partnership that in order for us to be successful, we have to have transparent communications. We have to use robust recruiting metrics to demonstrate progress and also identify improvement opportunities. And then we information share as a result of that. So we are actually doing those quarterly business reviews Andy was just describing, and we actually have kind of taken our own signature to it, where we actually have a separate discussion involving the key stakeholders like myself and some of the operational leaders from Yo, having much more detailed discussions around these areas. But then we also go to the greater order, where members of our regional staff, numbering between 60 to 80 participants, also join those business reviews, so they get educated on the types of progress that we are making and what are some of those challenges that we're trying to tackle together. So the key point here is that having that strong level of engagement backed by fully transparent data, it also helps alleviate some of the subjectivity or on-the-fly types of comments that might be directed in our direction or HR's, and instead positions us to really demonstrate to the business, not only do we have a robust process, but boy, we have some sound metrics that are really dictating a lot of the decisions that we're making together.
That's excellent. One of the things, that engagement, that communication, I think you've talked about that as we've gone through this whole thing. So one of the things you hit on there that I noticed, what is one of the questions we got was transparency. How do you create, and we just have maybe a minute for an answer, so I'll give you each maybe 30 seconds. Like, tell us about, how you create that transparency in that process so everybody sees what's going on. Andy, you want to start?
Yeah, so the 30-second answer is probably echoes what Patrick said. It's engagement first with key stakeholders, ensuring that you're very forthright in what your objectives are, and providing them with clear communications about where the talent organization stands right now. And what's interesting about that is that applies to both the RPO in their engagement with a talent leader like Patrick, as well as, and I'll speak for you, Patrick, but Patrick's connections to his overall organization.
Excellent. Patrick, what would you add to that?
Well, thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that. And so it's helpful to have a partnership, provide that type of feedback. But I would say that, very early on in my tenure with the SABIC, I realized that how out in front of the business you need to be. You can't sit in an office and tactically, try to solve problems in a reaction type of manner. I think that's a key mistake that some TA leaders or functions do, is they tend to be reacting to the types of feedback or experiences that they go through. You have to be out in front of the business, not only to showcase what you're doing well, but also to teach them something. And one of my senior leaders that hired me into SABIC says, Patrick, every time you come before the order, you teach us something. Keep doing that. And I took that very seriously, where I want to be thought of as an innovator, and I want to be also thought of as a person that's willing to go out and learn and gain the intelligence that I need to be successful. And that's what I've also given Andy and his team, especially Andy in his role, the opportunity to come into our audience within SABIC during these business reviews and share some of this incredible market intelligence that employers in general are actually experiencing. And some of these challenges are not too dissimilar to what SABIC is. So it's just a very good setup that we have, and a very good operating rhythm that has been long supported by the business. So it's a very good position to be in.
All right, and on that note, and on you educating and bringing that, we hope that you can also take away, everyone who's listening could have taken away some great information from these two leaders in RPO on how to build that business case, how to take it to that level, and how to constantly evolve your process and help educate your organizations on the value of talent acquisition and how we're doing. So we appreciate that. You can find more information on yo.com. We will be sending you this deck. And if you want others, we'll probably post this webinar as well if you'd like to have others on your teams take a look at this information. So first, Andy, thanks for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for hosting, Matt.
And Patrick, we certainly appreciate you being there and all the insight that you provided.
My pleasure, and thank you for everybody for attending today. I hope this was helpful.
Yep, great. So thanks, and we'll sign off for now. Look for other webinars that will help you make some great decisions on your talent acquisition solutions. Thanks, and have a good afternoon and good evening.